Flexibility for most people at this point in time is a big determining factor for what they're going to do for their jobs and careers. With like the world opening up now after the pandemic again and people having to return to office or being asked to return to office, flexibility is kind of a cornerstone as to what people are looking for and what they're asking for. And I think it's for good reason too. That's why this week we're going to talk about these return to office orders and the new dynamic that exists between us and our careers. Let's jump right in. To put it simply, hybrid work and remote work, it works. Like there's pros and cons to any style of work that we have. And the fact that there's so much pushback among, whether it's people of older generations or different corporations that are saying, hey, remote work is not the way to go. That may be true, actually. It just doesn't apply to everyone. But the fact that remote work and hybrid style work and these work environments do actually provide a good amount of benefits is just about weighing the pros and cons here. And so a couple of them that I've thought about really comes down to the social connection and social capital that we build throughout our careers. So for those of us who, again, entered the workforce during the pandemic, then we kind of end up lacking the social capital that our counterparts may have. Where what I mean by social capital is if you are starting out your career at like 22, 23, and then some odd years down the line, generally by this point in time, you've built up some connections, you've built up some mentorships, or you just had a good amount of coworkers that have gone through the gauntlet with you. And with that, that's what I mean by social capital. Because of these interactions you've had in person and with the people that you're consistently working with, sometimes for a couple years, sometimes just for a couple months, depending on turnover, retention, whatever it may be, then that results in a good amount of social capital. The people that you have in your network, whether they are casual, professional, personal, business related, whatever it may be, you've built up that connection and those levels, and that's good. Now, for those of us who are focusing on solely hybrid and remote work, that can be a bit of a challenge. And especially for the younger of us going into the workforce and then being only on hybrid and remote work at the beginning, then that also posed a big challenge because then instead of having those proverbial water cooler moments where you're just kind of sitting around or standing around with your coworkers, you're talking, you're chatting, you all know you're still on the clock, but at the same time, everyone's work's probably done for the day, so you're just taking a moment to relax and catch up and chat pretty much. And this is where that kind of divide comes in. Because the benefit of this remote work is for those of us that want to have that flexibility and the work-life balance, then we can actually do that a lot more. Our work doesn't become our life. We're able to actively go out and do things. We're able to structure our days around when our peak times for maybe personal relationships, family relationships, or whatever it may be need attention, and then we can do the work on the off hours or the hours in which it's still important to get it done, but it's also less of a drain on the other pieces of our lives. And so then the difference to this being, well, there's also then, as for most people put it, there's concerns about productivity, but also from most of the research that's being founded about this, that's pretty much unfounded. There's not a whole lot of discrepancy in there. For most people, they self-report that they feel more productive when working at home, when they have time to do so. It's just, again, what trade-offs are you choosing to make? Because even if you wanted to simplify it further, it's as simple as the commute. If you're working from home, you have a remote or hybrid-based job, then your commute is obviously none. It's from your bedroom to your office. And if you don't have an office, it's from your bed to your desk. I mean, saving a couple $100 depending on your car on gas every single month, that sounds great, especially with gas prices being so high. But hey. And then for those of you in office, then some people travel long distances of an hour or two sometimes, if not more, just for a particular job. And that in of itself is a choice and a sacrifice that they're choosing to make. And sometimes it can be the right one for them. Sometimes for other people, it just wouldn't be. And that's where I bring it back to this idea of the pros and cons of either hybrid work or return to office truly depend on the individual. And when I'm talking about the individual, the funny thing here is that I imagine most people probably tend to think that Gen Z wants to stay fully remote. They don't want to ever come into the office. They want only these online jobs or maybe hybrid. But that's actually kind of false. According to Gen Guru, which is one of the more leading firms on the Gen Z workforce and then multi-generational offices, while you would imagine that Gen Z likes to stay behind a screen and, most of us would assume that we have trouble, having face-to-face conversations. The thing is, 76% of us prefer face-to-face interactions. What that definition means, though, obviously varies. So I know there's people that would debate, is FaceTime count as face-to-face? Does it have to be solely in person? But overall, this is something that relates back to the pros and cons conversation of having that social capital, having that social connection, because for a lot of us, our jobs become a lot of the sources of fulfillment throughout our lives. Whether that's your personal goal-oriented fulfillment of, I really want to do this with my life and I really want to do this with my career, or it's community of, wow, I'll go out to drinks with my coworkers after work, or we hang out on the weekends. Maybe you were the best man or the maid of honor in someone's wedding, and that can happen from work because you spend 8 hours a day, usually at minimum, with your coworkers, and sometimes that's more time than you spend with your family and your own friends outside of work. So having good face-to-face interactions is something that really, really matters. But again, the definition between what face-to-face is varies. And for myself, like a good way that I look at this is right now for the job that I currently have as a recruiter for a staffing agency, I go into the office and I love that. I love the chance to actually just interact with my coworkers, again, have that proverbial water cooler moments, and really get to see people on a day-to-day basis. For me, that's very fulfilling and it's very fun. I also, however, don't rely on it solely. I make sure that I make time to go see my friends. I make time to go hang out with my family. I choose to wake up at 5 a.m. so that way I can go to the gym, so I can film videos, film these podcasts like this. I'm making time around the job. The job doesn't consume everything about me. And for some people, the transition into remote and hybrid work has allowed them to actively work on those other pieces of their lives that maybe were getting neglected, that maybe they wanted to dedicate more time to, but they just couldn't. And the first thought that comes to mind is, what about parents? What about someone that wants to be able to be there for their kids at home? Some people are able to make it work pretty well with the balancing the 9 to 5, if that's the actual schedule you have, which is actually very kind of, it varies as to if you're actually going to get that in the real world or not, quote unquote real world. But then for a parent that wants to be present, wants to be able to easily go to their kids' games, wants to go to their recitals, wants to actively have time to spend and see their kids grow up and not have to spend, again, those 8, 9, maybe 10 hours away from them. And to me, that's where the biggest benefit comes in, of finding that balance and those interactions that we get to have in person, because not all of that can be found in an office, and not all of it, I believe, should be found in an office. Your work should not usually be your whole life. And for the quality of life that we want to lead, it's really important that we do still bring in the conversation that for Gen Z as a whole, like, we are one of the most stressed out and anxious generations. Like 50% of us, 1 out of every 2 people, struggles with depression or anxiety in some form, in some capacity. And that's a lot. And at the same time, we're also one of the most educated and most diverse groups in history. And we still understand that there is value and power in in-person connection and in-person work. I think through the idea of like brainstorming is probably a good example here. For anyone that does knowledge-based work, then the ability to brainstorm together with your team, like you get everyone into an office, sometimes there's food. If you're lucky, someone bought pizza and donuts, and then you guys just kind of throw caution to the wind, essentially, and are thinking up solutions and ideas and new product lines and new service lines and really just letting everything kind of loose. That is something that's very hard to replicate online, and that's acknowledged. For most of us, we understand that we can have a brainstorming session, sure, but there is definitely a level of, I would almost say, just a level of personal connection that happens when you're actively working in a room together with somebody, and when you're working in a room with your team. Because, yeah, remote work does provide the benefit of that flexibility, but all of this, and truly all of it, whether it be the remote work or the in-office work, revolves around the conversation of what's the trade-off? What are you choosing to make the trade-off with? And I don't want the whole conversation to be centered around, well, Gen Z just doesn't want to come into the office. Gen Z just doesn't want this or that, or our employees don't want this or that. And move that conversation to, well, where's the stress and anxiety coming from? Because as a whole, actually stress and anxiety is still at an all-time high for people across the board. And having the chance to say, well, the job might be actually what's causing the stress and anxiety. The hours I'm putting in are causing me stress and anxiety. Maybe it's I haven't actually found time to go to the gym with the overtime of having to work. I haven't had time to really go see my family outside of the work. And really honing in on that question of, well, why is there so much stress and anxiety? And why is that stress and anxiety also blended into our jobs and our careers when sometimes it doesn't need to be? Sure, there's going to be hard times and stressful times, but at the overall, it doesn't need to be this continual cycle of just never-ending stress. And I think remote work as a whole does provide an outlet for some people to, again, find that balance. For others who really like the in-office, again, atmosphere, that actually may be the solution. Maybe home's really stressful. Who knows? It's different for everyone, and that is okay. For myself personally, though, one of the pieces that really does just like kind of get annoying is the continual discourse between when remote work is most effective. Because not every company, and this is true, not every company is designed to go remote. So throughout the course of the pandemic, we saw that pretty well, where some companies had transitioned to remote. Some companies went under because they couldn't do it. Other times went under because their workforce had to, step out of the field, whatever it was. But not every company is going to handle that transition flawlessly. I also don't think that, every single company is designed to really work and thrive with hybrid and remote work styles of, function. Because a good example is throughout the pandemic, we had some companies that, for actually a majority of them that had these kind of in-person worlds and in-person offices had to transition to remote work. And that wasn't exactly very smooth. Not every group, not every company was able to do so in a way that, properly optimized their networks or their systems in place, because not all of them could be transitioned to online without these major hiccups. But today's world, after a couple years of this, I think reflects just the need to have an open mind. The need to be able to say, okay, this may not be what I was shown all my life or what I grew up with throughout my career. However, it's working. Some companies are able to do this kind of remote and hybrid based styles of work and be highly effective, highly profitable, and highly optimized. And that's good. That shouldn't be a source of discouragement or this kind of conversation where they think, wow, they just have it so easy. They're so lazy. They don't want to do this. They don't want to do that. And then instead move it towards that is something that I'm grateful that they have. And anymore, it's nice to see that balance, because it does no one any good to have the conversation be, well, they just don't want to return to the office because they're lazy, as opposed to saying, hey, why don't they want to return to the office to begin with? What's the deeper reasoning? Is it something that the office is doing? Is it something that leadership is doing? You have to have the ability to ask that question critically of yourself and of others, because it benefits no one if you're constantly butting heads over this idea of you can't work unless you're in office, and realizing that the world's a lot more complex than that. And for us as individuals who hate being generally told what to do when it's something we already planned on doing, it doesn't make it any better to say, okay, cool, you have to do this. You have to come back to the office, where some people may have been planning to. Some people may have been thinking already, this would be nice because I get to have that connection with my team again. And then being told that for some people, I imagine it probably just revolves around this idea of, wow, well, I don't want to have to work somewhere where that's the demand. I have no other choice but to do something that I wanted to do. And that's because humans are just kind of irrational. But at the same time, this goes to show that the conversation still has to be open-minded. It can't just be a one and done type of conversation because every company is different. Plus, the fact that finding that work-life balance that we really want, and I believe all of us want some version of it, to me is more of an art than it is a science. Like, the fact that there's been the research going on over, I believe it's in Sweden, somewhere over there in Europe, in the European area, that they are testing out the 4-day work week. And it's not the 4 days with a decrease in pay. It's not with a decrease in benefits. It's just the 4 days you get paid the same salary and you're working an normal 8-hour day, 8.5-hour day if you include lunch, whatever. But the fact that there is solid evidence supporting the benefits of this is a fantastic start. And it's a fantastic opportunity because if you want to be a competitive company, why not offer that competitive advantage to say, hey, we offer this flexibility. And again, this is why I believe it's more art than science, and the fact that it means something different to everyone. Where I remember while working in retail, I had one particular team member that liked a really weird schedule in which he wanted his days off to be split. He liked the idea of working 3 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. And to me, that made no sense. I would always think, well, why not have a back-to-back, days off? Why not have a normal weekend? But for him, it worked because it was more of a mental game in terms of, well, I have my longer 3-day stretch and then I get a day off, and then I have a short 2-day stretch and then I get another day off. And to me, looking back on it, understanding that, again, this is more art than science, it works in that everyone needs some level of balance and some level of control over the schedule. If you're able to find that and you're able to, really lean into it, then I imagine that the benefit there probably outweighs the cons, in that you're able to, one, again, feel more in control of the life you're leading, the career you have. Two, you're finding it to be a lot more fulfilling because you're not feeling constrained by the rules and expectations of your company. And three, how you choose to structure it is in your control, and you're able to change it as your career and as your own personal needs advance and develop. And that is where it makes the most sense to me. To be able to say, if person A wants that, 2 days off all the time, back to back, great. That works for them because maybe they like the idea of being a weekend warrior. Or someone else really wants the 4-day work week and they want 3 days off all the time because they have their own side hustle they're working on. Fantastic. More power to you. I just think that it's ill-advised for us to think that we can somehow just revert everything back to the way it was before the pandemic. That we can revert everyone's expectation back to, you have to come into office, you have to commute, you have to sit in traffic, and where you sometimes have to deal with very lackluster culture within your own office. And that's why it's ill-advised, again, to think that you can force that status quo to come back, because the way I look at it, it's gone. Something new's replaced it, and you can't fight against that and expect to win, especially when the rest of the world is moving towards these changes, when everyone is looking for that semblance of control and that semblance of fulfillment. Accepting that the way we work has changed will save you a lot of time and a lot of headache, because the most certain thing that you can rely on is that things will change. Something will be different. The way it was back in your day, honestly, if that worked for you back then, that's great. And if it still works for you today, then you're also more than able to find places in which that style works and that style is promoted and, is the best way to work. However, that's not what you can force on everyone else. So the idea of the 9 to 5 is still around, but at the same time, anymore, it seems like the idea of working 9 hours or 10 hours is a lot more prevalent than most of us would probably say. And at the same time, this idea that everyone wants to do something different. We want fulfilling work. We want careers that are dictated by us and not by, someone else's journey and story because they think their way is the right way or the only way. As I said earlier, if you want to provide that advantage and truly get ahead, learn to adjust those rapid changes. There's going to be some mistakes along the way, sure. And sometimes that's going to be hard on companies. But if you choose to embrace that change now and find a way in which it either works for you, it doesn't work for you, or you can find a compromise within there, you're going to be in a much better spot for yourself, for your employees, for your team, and everyone that comes forward and interacts with you, your product, and your service. So don't fight the change in a way that you believe the status quo or the old way was better. Just because something is old only doesn't make it always the best. Sometimes it's just functional and something better can be coming along the way. And that's where it's up to us to really embrace that. Comment down below if you're watching this on YouTube. Do you have a remote or hybrid job right now? And if so, what's been the biggest benefit for you? And what's also been the biggest drawback for you? Because again, the conversation revolves around the pros and cons, and there's a trade-off no matter what you choose. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. It helps the podcast grow and continue to share it with others like you. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app of choice, be sure to leave us a rating. It helps others discover the show. Have an amazing day, you amazing people, and go out there and do great things.